Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on our Tools to Manage Cash Flow in Your Business through Sage 300 March 10th, 2022 Lunch and Learn webinar. I am Will Booth from DNA Business Management Solutions, and I will be your host today. Few things to get started, just to go over. We will be recording this session, so everybody's been muted. If you have any questions, there is a question and answer section you'll see in your GoToWebinar screen there. You can put any questions in there if you want to chat with me during the session. There's also a chat area. I'll be monitoring both. Today, as I mentioned, we are going to be going through some tools that are available to add to your Sage 300 system that can help you better manage cash flow across the various parts of your business. And I'm very happy to welcome Robert and Nancy Lavery from Robert Lavery and Associates. Great brother and sister team that helps us out with a large part of the third-party solutions that our Sage 300 clients add to expand out the core functionality in Sage 300. And we're going to be starting off with Nancy today, and she's going to go through some of the features and of the products, and then over to Rob. So without any further ado, we'll get that presentation done. Like I said, any questions, put them in the question window. If I think we can answer during the session, I may ask, but most likely we'll answer them at the end of the event. And we'll follow up with recording in a day or so in an email. So if there's anything you want to go back and review, it'll be in there. So Nancy, I'm going to make you the presenter, correct?
Yes, thanks very much, Will.
And I'll let you know when I can see your screen. There we go. Looks good.
All righty, great. Thanks very much, Will, and thanks everyone for joining us today. As Will mentioned, we want to talk about some solutions that can help you with managing your cash flow in Sage 300. So, we all know what a critical aspect of operating a business. One might say it's the most important part of running a successful business because, obviously if you don't have your cash flow in order, then the business really can't survive. COVID-19 has never made this more prominent than in the past. So you need to be able to know where you sit from a cash flow position and take into account your future expenses to ensure you have enough revenue to cover those and have quick access to your cash flow trends to make sure you're making informed decisions. So in this session, we want to talk about some solutions that can help you with that. So we're going to have a look at the cash flow forecasting module that gives you the ability to view your cash flow within one window. But the important part here is you can take into account the data that you already have in Sage 300, and you can take into account transactions from accounts receivable, accounts payable, as well as order entry, purchase orders, and the GL, and then take into account things like overdraft limits. So we'll have a look at that product. And we're also going to be having a look at a product for revenue and expense deferrals. So this gives you the ability to continue to enter your transactions in Sage 300, but you can identify those transactions as being deferral transactions and track those within Sage 300 and automate that process. So I would venture to say that most of you that are tracking your prepaid expenses or deferred revenue are doing that on an Excel spreadsheet. So we're going to show you a solution that will allow you to track that information within Sage 300 and take care of those recognitions. Once the schedule is set up, it's going to take care of itself and automate the posting of the recognitions when they become due. And then I'm going to also show you a collection module that gives you the ability to track your collection activity within Sage 300. Again, utilizing the information you already have, but giving you some tools to manage things like your overdue payment reminders and your collection activity. And then I will pass it over to Rob, and he is going to talk to you about managing your fixed assets within Sage 300. So without further ado, we're going to move over to the software. There's nothing better than just showing you the software itself. So each of the modules that we're going to show you today all install inside Sage 300. They're written using the same software development kit as Sage, so they'll have the same look and feel that you're familiar with Sage 300. And as I mentioned, we're utilizing the information you already have. We're not having you rekey or track your information in more than one place. So with cash flow forecasting, we're giving you the ability to manage your cash flow within what we call a management console. And it's a quick and easy way for you to view where you're going to be sitting from a cash flow perspective. So we're going to link to a bank that you have already set up in Sage 300, but we give you the ability to enter in overdraft limits. So if your bank has an overdraft limit, then you can take that into account in your cash flow. And you can choose to select a date parameter or even a year or period for which you want to build out your cash flow. So I'm just going to do a month from July 1 to July 31. So when I activate the screen, it'll show me the current balance in my bank account now. But I mentioned you can utilize the information in Sage 300. So you can generate what we call provisional transactions so that you can pull those into this cash flow forecast to see where you're going to be sitting. So if we want to take into account our AR invoices, for example, you can choose what the parameters are for the entries that you want to take into account. So for today's purposes, I'm just going to use the invoice date, and I'm going to select the documents that I want to bring in based on their due date. And I want those to fall within the parameters that I've set. So my July 1 to July 31. And then I can fetch the transactions that fall within those parameters, and you'll see those appear down here at the bottom of the screen. So I have the ability to view the transactions that fall within the parameters that I've set, and this select column will determine which entries I want to take into account in my cash flow. I can select all, deselect all, which means I can cherry pick which transactions I want to take into account. And once I've reviewed that, then I would just click this generate button, and it's going to generate those provisional transactions and bring those into the cash flow management console. So I can see I'll be sitting pretty good at the end of the month, but I've only taken into account my accounts receivable. In a perfect world, that would be great if we could only do that, but we do have to take into account our accounts payable. So I'm going to do the same thing and see what invoices I have coming due within that parameter. So again, I'm going to choose my July 1 to July 31 and see what AP invoices are going to be coming due in that time frame. So we'll generate those into the provisional transactions and take those into account as well. Now I could also do the same thing as it relates to order entry, purchase orders, and GL. So once I've taken those into account, I can see that by the end of the month, I'm going to be in a little bit of trouble because I'm going to be in a negative cash flow position. As we scroll down, you'll see the numbers start to turn red when I go into a negative position. And if we scroll even further down, you'll see that some of it starts to highlight in pink. And that's telling me that not only am I in a negative cash flow position, but these pink bars are telling me that I'm also going to exceed my overdraft limit. So, I need to take care of this. So if we have a look here, and let's just say July 24th, I know that I've got some new business coming. So this would be transactions that have not yet been entered in Sage 300. We want to give you the ability to take those into account. So the green button down here gives you the ability to create a new business entry. So again, something that hasn't yet been entered in Sage 300, but you know is coming down, and you want to be able to take that into account. So you can take into account receipts or payments. I'm going to say I know that I'm getting some funds in. This is a document management solution you see popping up, so that's actually a separate product. But let's say I'm going to take into account receipt here, and we want it to be within the date parameter that we've set for our forecast. So let's say that's coming July 23rd as an example, and it's going to be for $20,000. So I can add that to create a new business entry and save it and generate a provisional transaction for that so that I can bring that into my management console. And when I refresh the console, you'll see that I'm going to end up in a flush position at the end of the month, and you'll see where we've gone into a negative, and there's the new business entry. It's going to be highlighted in green to signify that it's a new business entry that hasn't been entered in Sage yet, but it's going to correct my cash flow for me. If you have recurring charges, you could take those into account here as well. And this new business entry, when it actually comes to fruition, I have the ability to promote that into Sage 300 and create an actual transaction for it. So you wouldn't have to rekey that when you're ready to set it up in Sage 300. So that's the overview of the cash flow forecasting module. Let's have a look at the revenue and expense deferral module. So with the revenue and expense deferral module, we're giving you the ability to track prepaid expenses or deferred revenue inside Sage 300. So you can generate an entry in any of the modules of Sage 300, and you identify that as being a deferral entry using the Sage optional fields. So you can choose to do straight line or declining balance, or if need be, you can create a manual schedule. And you see down here, as you make the choices within the module, it will create the necessary optional fields for you. So what your deferment method is, your defer from and defer to, so you can put in the date parameters for your deferral, what the deferment period is, and so on. But we also give you the ability to create templates, and the templates allow you to predefine parameters for different types of deferrals or prepaids that you're doing. So you can create as many of these templates as you like. You can see here, we're going to use this subscription for 1 year as an example today, but you can see I can have a template for a 2-year, a 3-year, as many templates as you need. You can define all of the parameters. So for my 1-year subscription, I'm going to do a straight line deferral, and then I can specify when I want to defer from. So whether that's when I enter it in Sage 300, or perhaps I want to put it on hold and I'm waiting for a milestone to take place, and then I will release it based on that milestone. And then you'll put in the parameters. So in this case, it's a 1 year. So I'm going to end it 1 year minus a day later. So if you think, January 1 to December 31. And then you have options in terms of the deferment period. Mine happens to be a calendar month, but you could do yearly, quarterly, fiscal period, even weekly as your deferment periods. And then you can specify for this type of transaction whether or not you want to do the deferral on the entire amount. So for example, if my subscription is $1,000, I can choose to defer the entire amount, or I can just defer a set amount. So for example, I only want to defer half of that, $500, or you can choose to defer a percentage of a transaction. And then you can put it on hold, as I mentioned, and you can choose to auto release based on a specified date or wait and release it manually whenever the milestone takes place. So in creating the templates, if you're using something like order entry as an example, what I could do is in inventory control, I have an item that's associated with my 1-year subscription. And so we'll just pull up that item. So there's my 1-year subscription item. And what you can do with the optional fields is link the optional field. So I've linked the RD template, which is the template that we were just looking at for subs 1. And by linking it to the item, when a user goes to enter an order, so this is someone just in the order department, may not be familiar with how you're doing deferrals or prepaid expenses. They're just there to enter orders. When I go ahead and enter this order in Sage 300 and I choose that 1-year subscription as an item, this user that's entered this order has done nothing different than what they would normally do. But by linking the template, when we scroll down, we'll see in the optional fields that template has come in automatically, which means the person entering the order has nothing to do with deferrals, but we've identified this transaction automatically as being a deferral transaction. And as soon as this entry posts through the general ledger, then it will be picked up as a deferral transaction by the revenue and expense deferral module. Now, I've just shown an example in order entry. You know, for example, maybe I'm going to do that entry straight as an invoice in AR. You know, you can do it against any entry in Sage 300, but just to show you an example, if I wanted to enter the deferral information separately, again, I can choose an item here for my 1-year subscription. And when I scroll over to the optional fields, you'll see here that it will list all of the separate optional fields. So you can either pull in a template, which I can do down here. I can pull that in manually just by clicking the finder. I can find that template and bring all of the parameters in. Or you can choose to manually enter the defer from, the defer to, the deferment period, and so on. So each entry that's done in Sage 300, you simply populate these optional fields to identify it as a deferral entry. And then, as I mentioned, it will ultimately post through the general ledger. And then periodically you will come into the RD processing screen and hit the process button. That is what's going to trigger the module to go and look through the GL entries, looking for those optional fields. When it finds a deferral entry, it's going to move the funds from the existing revenue or expense account. So when you're doing the entry in Sage 300, you're going to be posting against the revenue or expense account. The module is going to run through, look for those optional fields, and it's going to move the funds from the revenue or expense account to the appropriate deferral account and set up your recognition schedule. So when you come and do this process, it's going to do the GL side of it, and it's also going to look at your existing recognition schedules and automatically do those recognitions for you. Now, if you only have one deferral account, then you would just set it up as a global setting under the options. But if you have more than one deferral account, then you would set up these account sets where you're basically doing a mapping, your GL account, so your revenue or expense account, and which deferred revenue or deferred expense account it should be posted into. So, you know, you can easily do this mapping ahead of time, and then the system's going to know where to move those funds. Now, when you run the process, it's going to create what we call these RD transactions, where you can come and see those entries that have been processed with the revenue and expense deferral module. So under the RD transactions, I'll be able to see the GL batch that it was posted with, the entry and the line number, and I can drill into the initial batch. So here we're seeing the initial posting from the AR invoice to the original accounts. But then it'll show me the detail and reference description. Now, this is important because within this module, the reference and description fields become searchable parameters on your reporting. So within each module of Sage 300, you can decide which information goes into the reference and description fields. So for each initial entry, you can specify the information you want to see in the reference and description fields. And so, as I mentioned, it becomes a parameter on your reports. So this is something you want to look at when you initially do your setup. But it's also going to show me the GL account that the original entry was posted to, the date that that happened, where the entry was sourced from, in this case, the accounts receivable invoice screen. If you're running multi-currency, then you'll be able to see currency exchange here. And then we'll be able to see the deferral settings. So in this case, that template was used. It was a straight line deferral with these dates. Calendar month was the calculation base, and the deferral batch that was created. I can also drill into that deferral batch. So I can see that the source code is RD, which is the revenue and expense deferral module. It was a deferral entry. So this is where, when it created the schedule, it credited the original account and credited the deferral account and debited the sales account. So that's when it did the initial deferral. But then I can also view the schedule itself. So all of the calendar of the events that are going to take for your recognitions. And this column here is going to show you which entries have been recognized. So in this case, it's been fully recognized, but I can also drill into the recognition batches. So these are the RC entries, the recognition batches, where when the recognition came due, it credited the sales account and debited the deferred revenue account. So, there's a lot of information on this transaction screen to show you the details of those deferral transactions that have taken place. Just a few other options that you have. I've only got AR set up here, but you can signify as many entries in Sage 300 as you like. I've mentioned, it can be any module that you're sourcing the entries from. So you would just identify which types of entries could potentially be deferral entries for the module to be looking at. And then just some additional processing options. Do you want to take your recognitions based on the first or the last day of a deferment period? How do you want to handle overdue recognitions? If something was due last month, the first recognition was actually due last month, and I'm entering the transaction today, how do you want to handle that? You can post into last month, but that period has to be open in Sage 300. Or you can say, pull that recognition into the day or the period that I'm entering the transaction in. Or maybe I don't run revenue and expense deferrals until next month, which would be the processing period. So in other words, take last month, this month, and post it all into next month. So just some additional options that you have as it relates to the processing in revenue and expense deferrals. So I'll stop with that module, and we'll now go and have a look at the collection module. So with the collection module, again, you'll note that it installs inside Sage 300. So we're able to view the information that you already have. So again, we're not duplicating any of your data. We're just accessing it and compiling it in a way that's useful for doing your collections. So I'm going to show today based on the company. The company is equal to your AR customer. So we're going to have a look at the information from that view. But know that I'm giving you that view from a customer level. You also will have a universal view of all of the information. So we're going to have a look at the bargain mart for San Diego today. And this module was designed to give you a lot of information one click away. So when we open up this company page, the first thing to note would be these little blue arrows that we're seeing throughout the information for this client. Those are punch out capability. So for example, the website, I can click this button and it's going to take me out to the website. Or I can click and launch an email. Or on the address page, I can click and it'll launch Google Maps to show me where the customer is. I can also see what my customer number is in accounts receivable, and I can click to get to the customer account in accounts receivable. So this is just taking me straight to the standard AR customer screen. I can also one click get to the AR customer inquiry screen to see the information contained there. I can store as many contacts as I need. And if we open up one of these contacts, we'll be able to see all of the information related to that particular person. So I can store their phone number and email address, but I can also store things like their social media links. So, the idea here is that your clients are going to maintain their social media far better than you can keep track of what they're up to. So we wanted to give you the ability to link to their social media sites. So on the social media page, you can just come and you can add and choose the type of social media. And then you would navigate out to their social media site, copy the link to that site and save it. And when you do that, it's going to add a little button here on the front screen. And from that point forward, you would just click a button and it'll take you out to the social media site. You'll see throughout this software that you can link documents to view documents. So I've got them at the contact level, at the company level. I can also track my communications. So any communication, in this case, that went to Dawn, I'd be able to see those communications. I can also see them at the company level. So any communications that go out to a company, we'd be able to see that as well. So when we're talking about communications, you can send various communications through this software. So for example, if I click this send documents button, this is just telling me demo mode. When I click that button, it gives me the ability to resend documents to a client. So perhaps I'm talking to them about an overdue invoice and they're saying they didn't get a copy of that invoice. I can choose recipients. So I can go ahead and choose whoever I want to send this communication to. And then I'll be able to see all of the documents related to this customer. So their AR invoices, receipts, OE orders and invoices, credit debit notes, even statements. And I can cherry pick which ones to send. And then on the main page, I could attach additional documents. So if there's some other documents I want to include, I can do that. And then when I click the send documents button, it's going to send those documents out. So it's going to create a copy of the invoice, generate the email, send that communication to whoever I've chosen, and then it's going to log that against the company page so that I'll always have a record of that communication that went out. So if we now go to the communications, we'll see that an email went out on March 10th for AR invoice number 12, and I can open that up and view the email that went, who it went to, and what the attachments were. And of course, you could have much more information in the body of this email. So that's one way to resend documents, but you can also send, mass quantity documents. So for example, you could send statements or letters. And in doing that, it's going to, it's similar to the feature you have in Sage 300, but the difference here is it's going to track it as a communication. So the way we just saw that email that I sent, it'll appear the same way if we send out statements or letters. And in this case, you can choose whatever your selection criteria is. But you could also send out copies of invoices, but this would be from a batch level or an entry level or a customer. So you could do a range of customers. So I could say for my Bargain Mart San Diego, I want to send out all of the invoices, and I can send those documents. And again, it's going to create copies of those documents, generate the email, send that out, and then it's going to track it as a communication against this customer page. So back here on the San Diego Bargain Mart company page, we'll see that communication went out. So, you know, you've always got a record of when that communication went out. Now, we're still back at this company page, and some additional information you can access from this page is your collection information. So by clicking this button, it's going to show me all of the information relating to my San Diego Bargain Mart. So I can see all of the entries, and you know, whenever I see this box with a drill, it means I can drill to the underlying screen. So in this case, I could drill to the AR invoice screen and see the details of that AR invoice straight from this screen. I can see if they have any open cases. So a case would be typically a collection case. So you can choose a collection, a type of collection, or support, or an appointment, or we've given you a category of other. But this is where you can track your collection activity. So, you know, who it's assigned to, what the status is, when it was opened. If you need to revisit it, I'm going to show you a dashboard where you can view everything from a date-centric perspective, and it's going to be based on this revisit date. So, you know, I spoke to them, they're telling me they've sent money, but I want to make sure I follow up a week from today, so I can add in a revisit date, so it's going to appear on my dashboard when it becomes due again. So you can track those types of cases. Again, you can store notes, you can see the communications that have gone out. You can track disputed invoices, so where you've spoken to someone and there's a problem with the invoice, so it's under dispute. So you can track that as a disputed invoice. And when we get to the overdue reminder screen, you'll see that by tracking it as a disputed invoice, again, it's going to appear on your dashboard, you know, when you want to revisit that to see if it's been resolved. But you can also put it on hold so that the collection activity will stop, so you're not, you know, hounding someone for something that you've already spoken with them about. You can see the list of overdue invoices for this customer from this screen, and you can also see where they've said that they've sent payment. So again, you're going to put collection activity on hold for something that they've said that they've sent the payment for. So all of this information we've been able to see from one screen, which is the main company screen. As far as the collection activity itself goes, you have an aging screen where you can view an aging of your collections, and you can choose how you want to view that. So you can see it from a date perspective. You know, I've got 30, 60, 90, but an aging that you can view. And then the overdue invoices. So this is where you're going to be sending out communications to your customer when they have invoices that are overdue. So this overdue invoice screen, and we're going to stick with our customer 1100 here, Bargain Mart San Diego. So we can see here that invoice 12 is on hold right now. That's an invoice that's under dispute. So I've put it on hold. And I've also been told that they've sent payment. And so we've put this invoice 14 on hold. And by doing that, when I process the overdue payment reminders, those two invoices will not be part of it. The flags you may notice here highlighted in red, we're going to flag some information for you. You know, things like unapplied cash. So you have unapplied cash and accounts receivable. So you may want to have a look at that before doing your collection activity, or something's been disputed, or you have an open case. So these are all just flags for you to have a look at before you do your collection activity. But when it comes to sending your overdue reminders, you can do that from this one screen. So you can choose to do everybody at the same time. For sake of time today, we'll just choose our San Diego Bargain Mart. You'll notice the stage. So you have up to 4 different stages for your collection activity, and you can color code those. So I've got a lot of people that are delinquent in my stage 4. But you can have different color codes for each stage of your collection activity, so it's easily identifiable for users. So I'm going to say we'll process the bargain mart. It says I have 10 invoices overdue, but it's only going to send the reminder for 8 because we have 2 of them on hold right now. And it's literally a matter of clicking a button to create the overdue reminder. I can choose to attach copies of the invoices, and if I want to, I can assign a task to a user. So what that means is, as things move through the collection activity, maybe the initial stages you want to send out this overdue reminder, but maybe by the time you get to the delinquent stage, sending yet another email probably won't be all that effective. So what you can do instead is create a task list. And so by doing that, you can print the task list, and that would be something that someone would sit down and call clients that are in that delinquent stage. So it's up to you, whether you want to send emails or create a task list. So what's happened in this case is you'll notice the San Diego Bargain Mart is no longer listed here because we've sent the overdue reminder. The software has a mechanism built into it where you can specify a set number of days between reminders. So, you're not sending a reminder over and over again. But what it's done is it's tracked that communication that's gone out to the client. So again, when we come back to our San Diego Bargain Mart, we'll see that communication that went out for the overdue reminder. And again, I can open that up and I can view the details of that and view the email that went out. So in this case, all of the attachments that went, and then a list of the invoices that are overdue. And it'll also show an aging at the bottom for those invoices. Now you notice I didn't choose recipients for that. As part of the setup, you can specify for the contacts what types of documents they get. So for each contact, you would specify if they get the overdue reminder, or if they get copies of invoices, or if they get copies of statements. So that's something that you predefine. So then the user doing the collection activity literally just clicks a button to send those off. So with that, I'm going to wrap up this portion and pass it over to Rob, who's going to show you some of the fixed assets. And I'll just apologize in advance. I think I've taken more than my allotted time. So I appreciate your patience.
That's excellent. Thank you, Nancy. Rob, I'll make you the presenter.
All right. Thank you very much, Will. And thank you, Nancy, for that presentation. So in the remaining 10 minutes or so for today's presentation, I just want to give you a very high-level overview of the norming asset management suite of modules, which have a direct impact on your cash inflows and outflows with respect to the fixed assets in your organization. Now, of course, the accounting definition of an asset is often referred to as the future expected cash flows from that asset. So managing your fixed assets is a vital component of maintaining a healthy cash flow within the organization. And to do that, I want to show you a couple of the key features within the application, most notably within the asset register. We have, of course, the historical or original purchase cost, any adjustments to that book value, and the accumulated depreciation that shows a current net book value from an accounting perspective. But when we talk about cash flows, what's most important is the salvage value, because that does 2 things for us. That's the point at which we stop taking depreciation which of course is a non-cash expense, but it has cash flow implications when we have to replace that asset. So the salvage value gives you an indication of what you might expect to receive as a cash inflow against an asset that is fully utilized or its useful life has expired. But in addition to that, we hold an insured value so that you can keep track of whether you're maintaining sufficient insurance coverage for replacement cost of a critical asset in your organization. This is a very important aspect, particularly for people in distribution or manufacturing entities that have heavy equipment or key machinery that is used in the business to generate products and services that they're using, of course, to generate their core revenue streams. But also, by having appropriate insurance coverage, you're maintaining your bank covenants. In a lot of cases, the operating lines that you have from your commercial banker will have loan covenants associated with them, which might include not just accounts receivable, but also fixed asset covenants to ensure you've got appropriate insurance to cover replacement costs for key assets. Because the banks don't like surprises. And if all of a sudden a key asset fails and you need to spend $100,000 to replace it, that might mean an additional bank loan or an increase in your operating line, which of course is going to have an impact on your potential interest expense and financing costs within your organization. So it's really important that you're able to track and demonstrate that you're on top of your fixed assets, and one of those would be sufficient insurance coverage. In addition to that, if you're interested in tracking the useful life of the asset, you've got the financial accounting aspect, but also the usage or consumption of that asset. To do that, we have this concept of a production unit of measure. So in this case, with a fleet vehicle, we're tracking the kilometers driven, and we make an assumption of what 100% capacity of that asset is, in this case, 150,000 kilometers. And we use that as a measure of how much of the asset's useful life has been consumed based on the number of kilometers driven. So we can create these production batches which track the physical usage of the asset based on the number of kilometers driven. And then you can use that, if you wish, as a measure of depreciation. Of course, many companies will use straight line because from an accounting perspective, that's the one that's most simple, and it gives you a nice consistent depreciation calculation month to month. But in the case where your key assets are being consumed based on that unit of measure, you can also depreciate based on how much of the asset you're consuming as a measure of its remaining capacity. This is particularly important for mining companies where the loaders and crushers are mining ore, so they measure the capacity and usage of the asset based on the units of production that are being produced from the mine. And there are other cases as well. But that's an important aspect not only for depreciation purposes, but when we move over to the maintenance area, we can use a meter that measures the kilometers as a way of determining when we should be scheduling maintenance work on that asset to keep it in productive service. So again, the capacity estimate of 150,000 kilometers is what we use to determine how much maintenance work we're going to need. But then what we do is we establish a threshold for when we want maintenance orders created, in this case, every 5,000 kilometers. And we use the concept of a resource to determine what types of expenses we expect to incur against that asset when we're doing maintenance work. So as you might expect, replacement light bulbs, maybe some internal mechanic labor, oil filters, oil or tires are all possibilities for what might be consumed on a maintenance work order when we're doing that kind of work. And then, in order to maintain statistics about the use of the asset, we keep track of the reading averages to determine the average usage per day, which will give us insight into how long into the future we expect this asset to remain productive, but also the total usage in terms of kilometers and remaining capacity, both in kilometers and percentage terms. And then lastly, we keep a history of every time we've done a meter reading so we can see the current mileage on this vehicle. And then from an overall point of view, we keep statistics on how much it's costing us to keep this asset in productive service year to date and life to date. And that will also give us an indication of our cash outflows in order to maintain our fleet vehicles, as well as the number of times we're having to do maintenance on a vehicle, which then gives us insight potentially when we compare like assets. If we're having to spend more maintenance on a particular type of vehicle, is it because the manufacturer of that vehicle is not as reliable as another manufacturer, or is it because one asset is being used more than the other asset? So it makes sense that it would cost us more to keep that asset serviceable for use. And from an accounting perspective, we're keeping track of all of these maintenance work orders and the costs, whether we're consuming spare parts inventory, paying outside vendors, or consuming internal labor in order to maintain that asset. From a leasing perspective, asset management is able to tell us the type of contracts that we've got set up. If you lease assets into the organization, the lease in contract creates a billing schedule of the amounts that we need to pay to an outside vendor for the use of that leased asset. And it will handle both a standard operating lease, so we can see a projection into the future by period of how much we're anticipating paying for that leased asset. And in other cases, the asset might be under a finance type lease where there's a combination of principal and interest cost that's being incurred. And again, this gives us some insight into our cash outflows in order to be able to maintain that asset on the lease payment. Conversely, if we rent assets out, that's what we call a lease out transaction. And in this case, it's a measure of our anticipated cash inflows, whether that's an operating or finance type lease. So in this case, we'll see the principal amounts that are coming in and the interest revenue that's being generated off of a lease. So in this case, there's a very direct correlation between the value of the asset on our books and the cash flow that it's generating through a rental or lease contract agreement. And in order to maintain information about the assets, we have the asset tracking module, which is used to do physical counts and update the current physical status of the asset. We can use a handheld scanner through the mobile app, the eTracker app that comes with this application. And this allows us to maintain accurate location information as to where the asset is physically residing, but also its physical status. Is it normal and productive? Or is it missing, which is a big problem, of course, or is it damaged and in need of some maintenance work or possibly replacement? So by utilizing all of these different aspects of the norming asset management solution, we get insight into the current condition of our assets, the current location of these assets, the current consumption or usage of the assets, and its current maintenance service costs to give us an indication of when we might anticipate having to replace the asset or to do some repair work in order to keep it productive. From a reporting standpoint, I'll just touch on a couple of these reports that have an impact on cash flow. We talked about the ability to maintain information about the costs of keeping our assets in productive service. In other cases, we might be doing add-on transactions where we had to spend money to maintain the asset, and instead of expensing, we want to capitalize it. So in this case, we call that an acquisition add-on, where we could capitalize repairs expense, or if we do an addition to a building or add some additional functionality to a piece of equipment, those acquisition costs can be tracked and increase the book value of the asset that is currently in service. But it also then gives us insight into how much money we've been spending to update and maintain the asset. And in this case, we're capitalizing versus just expensing through the maintenance module. But we also have the capitalization analysis, which is our capital budget. And this allows us to set a capital budget specific to our fixed asset acquisitions, as opposed to the fiscal account budget within general ledger. And this will list for us all of the acquired equipment by cost center or department with a subtotal by department, and then show us the variance against budget. As you can see here, we've gone over budget, which is a negative capital budget. But for 2021, we started creating a new building with a budget of $500,000, which we've only consumed 150,000, which leaves us with 350. So again, the concept of being able to budget and manage our cash flows against fixed asset acquisitions, and then a total budget for all budget capabilities or categories, showing that we have a slight surplus, at least for today. So I hope that gives you an indication of how managing assets effectively within your organization can help you measure and anticipate the cash inflows and cash outflows associated with your key assets within the organization. And with that, I'll turn it back to Will for any closing comments.
All right, thank you, Rob, and thank you, Nancy. That was excellent. I will, just give me a second here. Show my screen. Oh, we're back. So I just have a couple of questions here, Rob. And Nancy, I think there's some for both of you. Whoops. So let's stay on the Q&A. So one question that I got here was, let's start with the most recent, Rob. So they asked on related to norming asset management, how do you get the mobile app and what kind of device does it run on?
Okay, very good. The mobile app is an Android or Apple iTunes or Windows 10 app. It's written in a development language that supports all three operating systems natively. It's actually free when you license the asset tracking module that we highlighted on the Sage 300 desktop. So that gives you the ability then to have people remotely outside of the office being able to scan information about those assets via a barcode, and then we upload that information into the asset register on what we call the units page. And that can update the physical location as well as the condition of the asset.
Okay, cool. And it'll work on any device? Or is there?
Yes, any native Android, Apple, or Windows 10 device.
Okay. Do you download it from the store or you get it and load it through norming?
Yes, it's actually available in both places, off the norming website and also through the stores.
Yeah, and we tend to set it up when it's required and assist obviously with the client using it and knowing how to use it. One other question on norming, Rob. Somebody asked, if I'm tracking my maintenance on an asset, is there some sort of a report that'll tell me that I'm probably spending more on maintenance rather than, can give me info into, is it better for my cash flow to buy a new asset, to like dispose of the asset and buy a new one?
Yeah, it'll certainly give you the information about what it's costing you to keep that asset in productive service, whether it's just the high level view I showed you in the maintenance profile for the asset. There's also a maintenance history report that will show you the cost of keeping that asset in productive service, which you could then use as a comparison to other like assets in your organization. The ultimate determination, though, as to whether it's more effective to purchase a new asset versus continuing to maintain the existing asset is probably going to be a combination of that data plus your own analysis of what you think is appropriate.
Right. So the data is there for sure. And then whether we create a report or some sort of other analysis. Okay.
And that might be, if I could just add one more comment, where you compare the net book value of the asset versus what it's costing you to keep it in service, because the depreciation, of course, is the non-cash expense. And if that's a lot lower than what it's costing you to service the asset, then it might be time to consider replacing it.
Okay.
As an indicator.
Yeah. Nancy, got a couple of questions here for you about revenue expense deferrals. Is there any limit on how long you might defer a revenue item, say like a 3-year contract, you know, for, I
There,
guess, something like a subscription or, you know, a membership or something like that?
there's no limit to it. You can define whatever those parameters are. So you could do a yearly, or, you know, whatever your calculation base is, doesn't matter. You can define any term for that deferral.
Okay. Um, and on the Tyrox side, I had a couple of questions. One was, how do you, how are users, let me just read here. I guess the question is it using Sage 300 users, or is there other users when you have Tyrox CRM?
So I was just covering the collection features, but
Right.
regardless, it's a module inside Sage 300. So if you're using just collections or you're adding in the CRM portion of it,
Mhm.
it's just a module in Sage 300. So you're
Right.
just logging into Sage 300. There's no
Yeah.
additional user licenses associated with that. But if
Right.
there's a CRM question, we should dive into that a bit further, maybe offline. So if
Yep.
that particular customer wants to know more about the CRM features, we can do that
Okay.
offline.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's basically just like any other module. If there's Sage 300 licenses available and you have the rights to use the module, then you can use the module.
correct.
The other question was, can I send different documents to different people? I guess that would be like, you know, somebody getting an invoice and somebody else getting the, say, the statement, or somebody gets the invoice and the statement, but only one person gets the statements.
Correct. Yep. So within the contacts, you can specify which types of documents each contact should be getting.
Right, perfect. Because that, it's really giving you the ability to have multiple contacts. And I guess I should state, I don't know that we talked about it, but Sage 300 newer versions has multiple contacts. So you can either leverage that version, or if you're on an older version or you haven't implemented that with Tarox, you get multiple contacts when you implement the CRM module, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Collections as well. Yep.
Yeah,
You can,
collections. Sorry, collections as well. So you can do
yep.
either
So
CRM and collections, or just collections, or I guess just CRM, right?
no, it's either CRM and collections combined or
Right,
just the collections.
right. Okay, okay.
Yep.
That wasn't a question, but yeah. Okay, good to clarify that. Let me just go
Yep.
back. I think that's all
And
the.
really,
Yep.
sorry, well, I'll just clarify that. You know, the meat of the module are the collection features that I've shown. The CRM portion is like a light CRM that would be kind of like accountant facing, where you can track opportunities, so
Right.
sales opportunities.
And
Okay, so
cases.
it's not like full-blown marketing campaigns and that sort of thing, but you
Right.
can track cases and opportunities. Yeah,
Right. And track, like you showed, tracking any kind of document that you send to the customer on the. So if somebody wants more
correct.
information about the CRM, they can get in touch with us, and you know, and
Yes,
CRM and collections, or just collections,
correct.
and any of these modules. There's, you know, this is today's examples were just some interesting add-ons that can help you with managing that cash flow and making decisions on what to do next, and making sure that things are being tracked without a lot of extra manual work. For example, revenue expense deferrals. You could still do a lot of that manually, but there would be a whole lot of effort. And as Nancy showed, maybe somebody in the company is just putting in an order for a subscription, but they don't have to know the back end accounting and all that detail. And nobody on top of that in the back end accounting has to really do much except run make sure the deferrals are set up and aligned with that item, and then the deferrals, when they run, will take care of it. So saving a lot of time and effort and chance for mistakes, helping your cash flow and your budgeting and planning. Norming, a lot of people manage their assets in a very manual way, and certainly norming gives you a lot more capability. And as Rob showed, there's some other modules there. If you're leasing or renting the asset and need to do maintenance on it and tracking consumption, then very good to do that. And the Tyrox tools always make things easier and better in CRM and or in Sage 300, whether it's CRM or just having a way to manage your collections. It can be very onerous for people, and you may have multiple people doing it, but they not so good at telling the others what's been done. So we've really seen people find big benefits from things like this. So I want to say thank you to you guys for helping us out. This will, as I said, was recorded, so we'll be sending out the recording after. Just to give you a brief update on the next events, at the end of the month, we're doing a demo of a new product from Sage called Sage HR. It's different than the old legacy Sage HRMS. It's a web-based tool from Sage, and we're going to be kind of running through an event to let people know what's available from Sage HR now. Quite interesting. And then in April, we're doing a Sage Enterprise Intelligence, presentation about how to do better financial reporting in your Sage 300 system. So go to our news and events tab on our website, and you can see more info and register there. Again, thank you to Nancy and Rob, as always, for helping us out with this. Give us a call or flip us an email at sales@da.ca if you want to know more info, or just ring the office 613-742-6565, and we'll be happy to give you that info. So I think we're pretty much out of time. Thank you all. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Will.
Thank you.